How are you employed, ma'am?
I'm employed with the Orange County Sheriff's Office in the Forensics Unit.
Okay. How long have you been with the Orange County Sheriff?
I've been with the Orange County Sheriff's Office for just over 5 years.
What is your assignment within the Forensics Unit?
Within the Forensics Unit, I am a crime scene investigator.
Did you hold that position back on December 11th of 2008?
Yes, I did.
On that date, were you called to a location on Suburban Drive?
Yes, I was.
Do you recall, or do the records of the Orange County Sheriff reflect the address, as specific as it can be, of the location on Suburban to which you responded?
Yes, it was the 8900 block of Suburban Drive.
Do you recall what time you arrived?
Yes, on December 11th, I arrived at approximately 11:25 hours.
When you got there, what was the condition of the scene?
When I arrived, it was raining out on scene, and there were several law enforcement personnel present, and it was dense vegetation throughout the area.
You said there were several law enforcement personnel present. Were any of those individuals in the woods?
No, they were not.
Where were they stationed?
They were stationed actually on the street to the north of the actual wooded area.
Do you recall whether or not a crime scene area had been cordoned off or taped off in any fashion at that point?
Yes, I do recall that there was crime scene tape up.
Okay. Did you see any individuals within the boundaries of the crime scene tape when you arrived?
The crime scene tape that I recall was set up further down the street, so yes, they were along the street, but not within the wooded area.
Okay. Is part of your job as a crime scene investigator to take initial photographs of the condition of a scene prior to the recovery of any potential item of evidence?
Yes.
In this case, did you take photographs of the scene as you found it upon your arrival on December 11th of 2008?
Yes, I did.
If I may have what has been marked as FF for identification. Ma'am, can you see FF for identification?
Yes, I can.
Is that photograph a true and accurate representation of the condition of a portion of the crime scene?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FF for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
168.
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you tell the members of the jury what they are looking at in this photograph?
Yes, this is a section of the wooded area showing the dense vegetation present.
If I may have FG for identification. Do you see FG?
Yes, I do.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of the portion, of a portion of the woods as you observed them that morning?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FG for identification.
What says the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
169.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, what is it that you are preserving through the use of photography with this exhibit?
This photograph shows another section of the wooded area, and in this photograph is also the beginning of a path that led into the wooded area.
Right. The screen that you have available to you is also a telestrator. You can touch it and indicate if you're talking about a particular item within the photograph. You said that there's the beginning of a path.
Yes, there is.
All right. Can you show the members of the jury where that is on the photograph? If I may have FH for identification. Can you see FH?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Does that photograph fairly and accurately represent the portion of the exterior of the wooded area that you were trying to capture?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FH for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered
170,
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, what is this that we're looking at?
This is another photograph of the wooded area. In this photograph, it also shows the beginning of the path that led down into the wooded area.
Can you show us on this photograph where that is? Would it be fair to say that this series of photographs were taken from a panoramic perspective from your right, then moving to your left?
Yes, this series is.
If I may have FI for identification. Is that photograph a fair and accurate representation of the next section of woods as you found them that morning?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FI for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered
171,
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
What is it that we're seeing in this photograph?
This is a photograph of another section of the wooded area.
In relation to the path that you had indicated on the prior exhibit, where is this?
I can't tell in this photograph where it is in relation to the path.
Okay. If I may have FJ for identification. Is that photograph a fair and accurate representation of another portion of the exterior of the woods as you found them on the morning of December 11th?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FJ for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered
172,
May we publish?
You may publish.
Ms. Welch, in relation to the path, excuse me, that you had discussed earlier, what is the vantage point of this photograph?
This photograph would show the area to the left if facing the woods or to the east.
Is the beginning of the path shown in this photograph?
No, it's not.
Where would it be in relation to this photo?
It would be out of the picture to the right.
Okay, over here?
Yes, that's correct.
The item at the edge of the photograph on the left side, can you see that?
Yes.
What is that?
It appears to be crime scene tape.
If I may have FK for identification? Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize it to be?
This is a photograph showing the wooded area and the actual street.
Is that photograph fair and accurate representation of the conditions of that area on December 11th of 2008?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FK for identification into evidence.
No objections, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
173.
Permission to publish that item.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, is this the vantage point looking almost directly to the left?
Yes, to the east.
This is the crime scene tape that we saw at the end of the last photograph?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And are these sheriff's office vehicles?
Yes, that's correct.
If I may have FL for identification? Can you see that item?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
I recognize this to be a photograph of the wooded area showing the path that went down into the wooded area.
Okay. Is this photograph fair and accurate representation of the conditions of the woods as you found them upon arrival?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FL for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
174.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Can you use the telestrator to show the members of the jury the pathway that you've designated? What is this item that appears in the pathway? Do you recall?
That item is a sign that is advertising for kindercare daycare.
Can you tell from this photograph, or can you demonstrate on this photograph, the path on the ground?
Yes.
All right, may I have FM for identification? Does this photograph fairly and accurately represent a continuation of the pathway?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FM for identification into evidence.
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
175.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
There are a few artifacts on this photograph. What are those?
I believe those to be raindrops.
If I may have FN for identification. Investigator Welch, do you see what's displayed in FN?
Yes.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of the condition of the woods as you move further into the path?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FN for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
176.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Can you indicate on the photograph how the path goes through this wooded area?
Yes.
If I could have FO for identification. Is this a fair and accurate representation of the section of the woods as, again, you move further along the path?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FO for identification into evidence.
No objections.
We received an evidence as states numbered.
177,
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Can you indicate on this photograph how the path makes its way through the woods?
Yes.
What are these items along the red illustration that I've added to the photo?
Those are vine vegetation.
Is this all hanging off of trees?
Yes, it is.
May I have FP for identification? Do you see FP for identification?
Yes, I do.
Is that photograph a fair and accurate representation of the portion of the floor of the woods?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would seek to introduce FP for identification into evidence.
No objections.
We received an evidence as states numbered.
178,
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Ms. Welch, did the Office of the Medical Examiner, with you present, ultimately recover a skull from this area?
Yes, it did.
Is the skull shown in this photograph?
Yes, it is.
Can you show the members of the jury, if you can circle it, where the skull is? May I have FQ for identification? Is FQ a fair and accurate representation of a close-up of the skull as it was found by you and members of the Office of the Medical Examiner?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FQ for identification into evidence.
No objections.
We received an evidence as states numbered.
179,
Permission to publish this item, Your Honor.
You may publish.
Ms. Welch, what portion of the skull is this?
This would be the top, and you can see part of the right side of the skull.
If I may have FR for identification? Is that photograph a fair and accurate representation of the location of the skull pulled a little further back for orientation purposes?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FR for identification into evidence.
What says defense?
No objections.
We received an evidence as states numbered.
180,
Permission to publish this item?
You may publish.
Ms. Welch, where is the skull found within this photograph? Oh. Let me get rid of that
Oh,
line.
sorry.
Go ahead.
It's located to the west of the log.
May I have FS for identification? Is that photograph a fair and accurate depiction of the view looking back out towards the road?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FS for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
181.
And permission to publish.
You may publish.
Ms. Welch, Investigator Welch, what is your position when this photograph is taken relative to the skull?
I would be standing near the skull looking west. I don't recall exactly where in this photo.
Okay. And what is this item, just for clarification, in the photograph?
That's a light pole.
Is that light pole on Suburban Drive?
Yes, it is.
May I have FT for identification? Do you see FT?
Yes, I do.
Is this another angle that shows additional evidence items that were ultimately collected by the Orange County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, it is.
Does it fairly and accurately depict the skull with other items associated with it?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FT for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
182.
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you identify in the photograph the other items of evidence and then orient us to the skull as well?
Yes, I can. The skull is located to the west, the northwest area of the log, directly northwest of the skull is a black plastic bag. On top of the black plastic bag, at the northwest corner area, is a off-white canvas bag. To the west of the skull is a plastic Disney bag. And that's all that I'm able to observe in this photo.
Yes, ma'am. If I may have FU for identification? Does this photograph fairly and accurately represent the scene as you found it with other items of evidence that were ultimately collected?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FU for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
183.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you orient us to the various items in the photograph in relation to where the skull is?
Yes. This would be the log. This is the off-white canvas bag, the black plastic bag, and the black plastic bag and off-white canvas bag would be to the northwest of the skull, which I can't really see in this photo, but it would be in this direction.
May I have FV for identification? Can you see FV?
Yes, I can.
Does FV fairly and accurately depict the condition that you found the skull in on December 11th of
Yes, it
2008?
does.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would seek to introduce FV for identification into evidence.
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
184.
Permission to publish, Your Honor.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, where are you standing when this photograph is taken?
I'm standing to the northwest of the skull amongst the vegetation that's located along the west side.
Did this vegetation on the west side obscure your view of the skull to a certain degree?
Yes,
Can you show us where the skull is and which portion of the skull we're viewing in this picture?
yes. This photograph shows the skull and the front of the skull at that location.
May I have FW for identification? Does this photograph fairly and accurately depict another section near where the skull was located?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I'd seek to introduce FW for identification into evidence.
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
185,
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, you had earlier mentioned a log in your testimony. Is that log shown in FW or 185 in evidence?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If you could just illustrate on there which log you were referring to.
Yes.
And where are the other evidence items that you made reference to as it relates to this log?
They're located on the west side of the log, which would be on this side.
All right. There is an item that is red, right? Not the one that I made, but next to it. Let me clear it. What other evidence items are visible in this photograph?
Visible in this photograph is the black plastic bag and off-white canvas bag.
May I have FX for identification? Does FX represent, fairly and accurately represent a view of the evidence items under the log?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would seek to introduce FX for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Be received in evidence as,
186,
Permission to publish.
you may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you show us where the log is in this photograph in relation to other items other items that were ultimately taken as evidence?
Yes. The log is right here. And in relation to the items of evidence, there's a black plastic bag there, the skull, and in this photograph you can see a pair of shorts.
May I have FY for identification? Can you see FY?
Yes, I can.
Does it fairly and accurately depict a different vantage point of those evidence items that you just described?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FY for identification into evidence.
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
187,
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Again, if you could orient us to the various evidence items in this photograph.
Yes. That's the skull. In this photograph, you can see a pair of shorts. and the black plastic bag. And barely visible is the red plastic Disney bag.
May I have FZ for identification? Does FZ fairly and accurately represent a close-up image of the skull as you found it?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce FZ for identification into evidence.
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
188.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Can you orient us to the items that are depicted in 188?
Yes, I can. The skull is in that location, and this photograph shows also the black plastic bag.
May I have GA? Do you see GA?
Yes, I do.
Does GA fairly and accurately represent another angle of evidence items ultimately collected in this case?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would seek to introduce GA for identification into evidence.
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
189.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you orient us to evidence items in the photograph?
Yes, I can. Black plastic bag, and in this photograph, you can see a pair of shorts.
May I have GB for identification? Investigator Welch, can you determine if there are evidence items in GB?
Yes, there is.
Does this fairly and accurately depict those items?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GB for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
190.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Investigator, what evidence item appears in this photograph?
In this photograph, you can see a small section of a beer bottle that was found on scene, and barely visible in the top corner is a black plastic bag.
May I have GC for identification? Do you see GC?
Yes, I do.
Right. What is represented in this photograph?
In this photograph is a view of the skull as well as items of evidence.
And does this photograph fairly and accurately depict what you are attempting to capture through photography?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GC for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
191.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Can you orient us to the other items of evidence that you made reference to?
Yes. Barely visible in the photograph is black plastic bag, and also in this photograph is clothing remnants.
How would you describe that piece of clothing remnant?
It is a collar with a tag still present.
Where would the front portion of the skull be in relation to these items?
The front of the skull would be located right there.
May I have GD for identification? Does this photograph fairly and accurately depict one of the evidence items that you just described?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point in time, I would seek to introduce GD for identification.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
192.
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Which evidence item have you taken a close-up picture of in this case?
This
In
is
this
a
photograph, I'm sorry.
sorry. This is a close-up photograph of the clothing remnants, which I previously described as the collar with remaining tag.
Can you show us where that is?
Yes. The tag by the arrow.
What is this item at the bottom of the photograph?
That would be the front of the skull with duct tape.
May I have GE for identification? Does GE fairly and accurately depict evidence items ultimately collected by the Orange County Sheriff?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GE for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
It will be received in evidence as states numbered.
193.
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you orient us to the various items shown in this photograph?
Yes. This would be the off-white canvas bag. This large black item is the black plastic bag. And in this photograph, you can also see the skull.
Prior to collection, could you tell whether or not any of the items were contained inside each other? For example, was any portion of the black plastic within the white canvas?
Not that I could tell.
If I may have GF for identification. Does that photograph fairly and accurately depict items of evidence and the condition in which they were found?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GF for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
194.
Permission to publish.
You may publish.
What is your vantage point when you took this photograph?
I would have been standing to the east of the black plastic bag, which would have been northeast of the skull.
Does this photograph show vegetation that obscured these evidence items from the vantage point you just described?
Yes, it does.
And which items are shown in the photo?
In this photo is the off-white canvas bag and the black plastic bag.
Is the skull in the photo at all?
I can't tell from this photo.
Okay. Can I direct your attention to an item in the corner? Can you see that?
Yes,
What is that?
that appears to be duct tape.
Was that duct tape free on the scene, or was it the duct tape that you had earlier described as being with the skull?
It was the duct tape that I had earlier described as being on the skull.
May I have GG for identification? Does this photograph fairly and accurately represent the evidence items that were ultimately collected from a different vantage point?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GG for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Be received in evidence, the state's numbered.
195.
Permission to publish this item?
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, can you tell us what your vantage point is when taking this photograph?
Yes, I would have been standing partially over the log to the southeast of the skull.
Okay. Is the log shown in the photograph anywhere?
Barely, along the bottom.
Did you have to lean over the log to take this photo?
Yes.
Can you show us what items of evidence are within the photograph?
Yes. The black plastic bag. Barely visible is the off-white canvas bag. The red plastic Disney bag. And that would be the skull.
May I have GH for identification? Investigator Welch, do you see GH?
Yes, I do.
Does GH fairly and accurately represent a close-up of items of evidence that you've described?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GH for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence, the state's numbered.
196.
Permission to publish?
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, what are we looking at in 196 in evidence?
This is a close-up photograph of duct tape that was on the front of the skull, and in the photograph you can also see the clothing remnants.
Is that this item
Yes, that's the clothing remnants.
with the tag in this direction?
Yes, that's correct.
May I have GI for identification? Is this another angle of the same evidence item?
Yes, it is.
Is there another item that can be seen in the photograph as I've marked with red line?
Yes,
Is this photograph fairly and accurately depict the condition of the items as you found them?
yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GI for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received in evidence, the state's numbered.
197.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Investigator Welch, I had made a mark with a red line before the item was published. What is it that is shown in that photograph?
On scene, it appeared to be a white towel, but I was later advised that it was a blanket.
May I have GJ for identification? Do you see GJ?
Yes, I do.
Does that fairly and accurately depict another vantage point?
Yes, it does.
Okay, Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GJ for identification into evidence.
What says the defense?
No objections.
Will be received in evidence as states numbered.
198,
Permission to publish?
May publish.
Investigator Welch, what are we looking at in this photograph?
This is a view standing near the black plastic bag and off-white canvas bag, showing a view towards Suburban Drive.
Does this fairly and accurately represent the scene as you found it that morning?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GJ for identification into evidence. Oh,
Nope.
I already did that. Sorry. All right. What is the evidence item that you made reference to?
In this photograph, you can see the off-white canvas bag.
Let me then move to GK for identification. Do you recognize the photograph?
Yes, I do.
Does it fairly and accurately depict the condition of the scene as the medical examiner arrived and began to remove the remains?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this point, I would seek to introduce GK for identification into evidence.
No objections.
Be received as states numbered.
199,
And permission to publish this item.
You may publish.
Can you orient us to the items in the photograph and tell us what is happening at this juncture?
Yes. In this photograph, it's the black plastic bag, the red plastic Disney bag. In this photograph is the skull with duct tape present. And in this photograph, the Chief Medical Legal Investigator, Stephen Hansen, is picking up the skull to remove it from the scene.
Thank you, Ms. Welch. Your Honor, at this point, I have no other questions of the witness on these particular issues.
Cross-examination.
Please, the court. Investigator Welsh, good morning.
Good morning.
I wanted to talk to you about your position.
Okay.
As a crime scene investigator, one of the first and most important things that you do is try to document the scene.
Yes, that's correct.
And your job is incredibly important because you want to try and show as best you possibly can the jurors what that scene looked like when you first arrived.
Yes, that is correct.
And you are trained extensively on how to do this.
Yes, that would be correct.
And part of that reason, well, the main reason for that is that you never get a second chance at an actual crime scene.
Yes, it is rare.
And the importance of having a scene preserved is because once people come in, it would get contaminated.
Yes.
And the more people that come in and observe the scene, the more contamination it has, correct?
Yes, that's true.
And if there is a body or remains that have been tampered with, that would affect everyone's ability to do their job, correct?
Yes.
It would affect investigators to be able to determine what happened at that location.
Yes.
It could affect as well the medical examiner in determining what may or may not have happened. To a
Yes.
limited extent, right?
It could.
Yes. And some of the things you also look for is to see if a scene is staged, do you not?
Yes.
And it is very common when you have scenes to be careful and to observe and look for these things of what may be a staged scene, correct?
Yes.
And that's because sometimes there are people who try to conceal certain items of evidence.
Overruled.
You may answer.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Sure. And that's because sometimes people try to conceal certain items of evidence.
They may.
And then there are those staged scenes where people try to make the scene look like something else happened there.
Yes, they could.
And that is why it is paramount, to the utmost important, that the scene be preserved and that the scene not be tampered with in any way.
Yes, that would be correct.
May I publish state's evidence GE
What's the evidence number?
93? 193.
You may.
I don't know if, can you all see that? Okay. Now I'd like to draw your attention to,
The witness can't see it.
oh, I'm sorry. That wouldn't be fair. Investigator Welch, can you see it now, ma'am?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I'd like to draw your attention to the duct tape area. Can you draw a circle around the duct tape? Now, is it fair to say, Investigator Welch, that the duct tape is somewhat in the air on this photograph?
It appears it could be.
Okay. And you can see almost the entire width of the duct tape, can you not?
Yes, it appears you can.
And it is, would this area be classified as the front of the skull?
Yes.
And the end portion of the duct tape would be right there, would it not?
Yes. If that is the duct tape, yes.
So as you see it now, it is flat on the ground, pointed at, I guess what could best be described as 1 o'clock, correct? In that direction?
I can't tell if it's flat on the ground, but it does appear to be pointed in that direction.
Can I see GF? Okay. May I publish state's evidence 194?
You may.
Can you see that photograph, Investigator Welch?
Yes, I can.
Can the jury see it as well? Okay. Now, here you do not see, I'm going to draw a circle around the duct tape if that's okay. Can you see that there?
Yes.
Okay. Here you see the duct tape, but not the skull, correct?
It appears to be the duct tape, yes.
And it is also lying, or appears to be lying, flat on the surface.
I can't tell if it's laying flat.
Okay. You can almost see the entire width of it, correct?
Yes.
And there appears to be an end piece right about there.
If that is the duct tape, yes.
Okay. And then the other end piece would be down here. I may have drawn over. Let me clear that. Down there.
Yes, it appears to be.
Can I have GH, please? May I publish, Your Honor, State Evidence 196?
You may.
Can you see that, Investigator Welsh?
Yes, I can.
Can the ladies and gentlemen of the jury see it? Now, this is a close-up of the duct tape, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, here you can see pretty much the entire width of the tape. Can you not? Right there, through there.
Yes.
And here, you actually see the end of the duct tape, do you not?
Yes, it appears to be the end.
Where it would be the cutted edge or something to that effect?
I can't tell if it's cut, but it appears to be an end.
Okay. You can see that it's an uneven edge, can you not?
Yes, I can.
And that would appear to be the end of that piece of duct tape, correct?
It does appear to be.
That was GH, correct? Could I have GI? Your Honor, may I publish State's Evidence 197?
You may.
Investigator Welch, can you see that photograph?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now, what we're looking at, again, is almost the width of the entire duct tape from here to there.
Yes.
And this area here appears to be the edge of the duct tape or the ending.
It appears to be a section of the ending.
Can I have the last photograph? May I show Your Honor the jury State's Evidence 199?
You may.
Investigator Welch, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Now, this is Investigator Hansen, correct?
Yes.
And he is currently collecting the skull at this time.
Yes.
And he is also at the same time collecting the duct tape, is he not?
Yes.
And in order to collect all of them, do you notice that he has to apply some force to lift all of those items together?
He would have to apply force to lift it, just like you would have to lift anything.
And he's also including extra, I guess, foliage where I've just drawn. Can you see that?
It does appear that he is also grabbing vegetation.
That's a better word. And also, he is also applying pressure in this area, is he not, as he's collecting it?
I can't tell.
He would have to in order to lift it.
In order to lift the skull.
And he's not wearing any protective footwear, is he?
Not other than boots.
And the person next to him is also not wearing any protective footing, are they?
No.
And it appears his other leg is also stepping on other items of evidence that would be collected. Is that correct?
They could be.
I can have just one moment. Thank you, Investigator Welch. I have no further questions at this time for this topic.
Redirect?
Chief Investigator for the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office.
Mr. Hanson, how long have you worked for the medical examiner's office?
Here, almost 7 years.
Right. And who is the medical examiner for the District 9?
The Chief Medical Examiner is Dr. Jan Garavaglia.
Prior to working with the medical examiner in District 9, where have you worked before that?
For about 18 months prior to coming here, I was a crime scene manager for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. For 11 years prior to that, I was the chief investigator for the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office in San Antonio, Texas.
Now, what are the responsibilities that you have in your present position?
As the chief investigator, I supervise and do the scheduling for all of the investigators assigned, but I also go ahead and work cases myself.
Is one of your responsibilities the collection of human remains for later examination by the forensic pathologists that work for the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office?
Yes, it is.
On or about, or on the 11th day of December of 2008, did you receive notification of the location of what were believed to be human remains in an area in Orange County, Florida?
Yes, I did.
Approximately what time did you receive that
It was
notification?
around 11 o'clock in the morning.
And, pardon me, did you then travel to a location in one of your medical examiner's vehicles?
I traveled to Suburban Drive in Orlando.
And when you arrived there, did you take photographs of the scene in general and various items of evidence that were collected?
As part of my entire investigation of the area, yes, I did.
Let me, if I may have the witness shown, State's Exhibit for Identification BV. Do you recognize State's Exhibit BV?
Yes, I do.
And what does it show?
This is, it looks like it's the south side of Suburban Drive in Orlando.
Would this have been a photograph you took when you first arrived before actually entering
Yes, it is.
the scene? Does it fairly and accurately depict the scene as it was when you arrived?
Indeed.
When you arrived, was it raining?
Yes, it was.
At this time, you ought to move to evidence State's Exhibit B for identification.
What says the defense?
No objection, Your Honor.
You received an evidence that states number.
And may I publish?
You may publish.
I just describe sort of what we're looking at as we look at this photograph.
When I do a scene investigation, I take photographs of the area surrounding the scene specifically, and this is the road, Suburban Drive, and specifically a portion of the area that was in question. Further inside the woods is where the actual scene was at the time.
All right. If I could have States BW. Do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, I do.
This is a photograph that you took on the date we've been discussing.
Indeed.
Does it fairly and accurately depict the scene as you saw it?
Yes, it does.
This time, state would move into evidence, State's Exhibit BW.
Well, no objection, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right, tell us what we're looking at in this photograph.
This is the south side of Suburban Drive, and as you can see up towards the center top, it looks like there's a little bit of an opening in the growth, and that would be kind of the path that led into where the remains were found.
The monitor you have in front of you is a telestrator. If you'll touch the screen, you can make a line or circle,
okay.
kind of circle the entrance
Okay.
as you
This is
recall.
kind of the,
That area right there. Thank you. May have State's Exhibit BX. Do you recognize this photograph?
yes, I do.
And does it fairly and accurately depict the scene as you found it
Yes.
as moving further into the
Yes,
woods?
it does.
This time you're going to move into evidence, State's Exhibit BX.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right. Take us through again what this is showing us about your path as it continued
Again.
into the woods.
During the course of a scene investigation, you take various photographs and you go from a larger area into a smaller area, and this is a photograph in that series moving into the area where the remains were found.
There's an item that appears in the photograph here. Was that a advertising sign for something? Do you recall?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, sir.
Was that an advertising sign for something?
If there was an advertising sign that was there, I'm not exactly sure if that was it. It's a little far off. It could well have been.
All right. If I could have the next photograph be Y. And again, is this another photograph a little bit farther down the path?
Yes, it is. And in this one, you can see, I think the item that you were referring to over here, and that was some sort of a plastic advertisement that has the little metal stands on it that stick into the ground.
And does this fairly and accurately depict the scene?
Yes, it does.
State will move to evidence, State's Exhibit BY.
No objection.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
Request to publish?
Publish.
All right, so just, you've circled an item, that's the little sign going in. Kind of give us a line as to how you would have to continue on this path to get to the area of concern.
Oh, not very good at that. Kind of
just-
like that.
Slightly curving to the right.
Exactly.
Could I have State's Exhibit BZ? You recognize that? Is it a fair and accurate photograph of the continuation of the path?
Yes, I do.
State will move to evidence, State's Exhibit BZ.
No objection, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right. Again, if you just show us sort of where is the continued path to the area that we're most interested in. Very good. Could I have State's Exhibit CA, please? You recognize State's Exhibit CA.
Yes, it's further into the area in question.
And again, does this fairly and accurately depict the scene as you found it?
It is.
State, this time, Your Honor, State would move into evidence, State's Exhibit CA.
No objection, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Now, in this photograph, do we see the first hint of the area that we're going to be talking about?
Yes, we do.
Could you just circle it so we get that perspective from this photograph? And would that item be a fallen log?
Yes, it is.
And the area of concern is just after that?
That's correct.
Could I have State's Exhibit CB? Can you recognize that photograph?
Yes, I do.
Does it fairly and accurately depict the scene?
Yes, it does.
State would move into evidence, State's Exhibit CB.
No objection, Your Honor.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
All right, again, this is getting us a little bit farther in. Can you, for orientation, just put a line around the area of concern as we're now approaching it?
It's right around there.
Now, was this photograph, do you recall, taken with flash?
Yes, it was.
Right. Now, obviously, this photograph is assisted with flash. Does it fairly and accurately depict the difficulty in seeing items in that area, or is it better because of the flash?
The entire area was heavily overgrown, as you can see. It was dark and raining. The flash didn't really help that much. It was a good camera. Having looked back on it, I think some of the pictures were better than what I was able to see at the scene with my glasses getting water drops on them.
Okay. Again, because it was still raining the whole time you were there.
Indeed, yes, and cold.
Your Honor, this might be a good time for us to take our lunch break before we get into anything more.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the time is now 1 minute before the hour of noon. I'm going to ask that you not discuss this case among yourselves, and please remember all of my other previous admonitions. We will be in recess until 1:30. Any additional instructions on behalf of the state?
No, sir.
Or the defense? Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Did you heed all of my previous admonition during the noon recess? Okay. All right, state and the defense both recognize the presence of the jury.
Yes, sir.
You may continue, Mr. Ashton.
Mr. Hanson, I believe where we left off before lunch, you were making your way back to the area of interest. When you arrived at the area where the remains were, can you kind of describe the area? In other words, in terms of its vegetation, things of that sort.
Yes, sir. It was heavily overgrown and undergrown with there was a rotten log, there was a lot of vines, there was a lot of undergrowth. It took me, even when I got to the area and Detective Mellish tried to point out the things that were pertinent, it took me a while to orient it, to pick them up. The photos that you showed going in were photos of the area, but I hadn't noticed until we got in there and looking. So it was very difficult to see. Once you picked it up, then it was much easier. But initially, it was very difficult to discern.
What, did someone have to point it out to you, the skull, to say, there it is?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If I may show the witness, State's Exhibit CH for identification.
Right.
Let me just make sure. Yes. Can you see that photograph?
Yes, I can.
Was this one of the initial photographs you took upon being shown where the remains were, but before major clearing had occurred?
No, it isn't. This is one, this was after some clearing had been done.
All right.
Taken from the opposites. I take that back. Some of the area had been cleared a little bit, but this was maybe the second or third photograph that was taken.
So within the process of clearing a bit?
Indeed.
All right. And does it fairly accurately depict what it shows?
Yes, it is.
This time, Your Honor, moving to evidence, State's Exhibit CH.
No objection.
Be received in evidence as states numbered.
207.
I publish.
You may publish.
All right. Now, from what perspective is this photograph taken, Mr. Hanson?
I'm standing, if you look at the lower portion of the photograph, there's what looks to be a rotten log. I'm on the other side of that, and we're looking across. I'm not 100% sure what the direction was. The orientation was a little tough in there. But we were looking across so that what looked like to be the skull was on the left-hand side, and then the plastic bags and some of the other things were over on the right.
I'm going to put a little line here. This is the log you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Where I've just
Indeed.
made a line. All right. And are you essentially directly above the skull or approximately?
Just a little bit behind it. but very close.
Right. Can you see in this photograph was there duct tape on or near the skull?
I'm not sure that I was able to appreciate the duct tape right at that point. These were, again, a series of photographs that we take as we go in so that we have orientation and background. So I was more interested in making sure that I got everything in there than doing a close examination of the scene itself.
Now, after that, this photograph, of course, you did have a chance to examine it more thoroughly and
Yes, sir.
identify. Okay. Was there duct tape on or near the skull?
It appeared to be duct tape from what I could see, yes.
Can you point out on this photograph where that is?
I would think that it's kind of right around in this area.
So this bit of gray we see just above the skull in the photograph?
Actually, it's not above the skull, it's in
I
front of
meant
the skull.
in the photograph.
Oh, yes, yes, sir.
The upper part of
Right.
the photograph. I don't.
Indeed, yes.
On top of it. Okay. And, all right, let's go on. Excuse me. Now, once this photograph was taken, did you, with the assistance of the crime scene investigators, clear all of the vegetation above the skull and the other items associated with it?
Not right away. Additional photographs were taken, but at some point then, we went ahead and started to clear it out so that we could see it better.
How long were you actually at the scene between arrival and when you left with the remains?
I'd have to say it was 3 or 4 hours.
So we're condensing 3 or 4 hours into
Yes, we
a
are.
short period of time. All right. May I have State's Exhibit CI? Right. Can you see State's Exhibit CI?
Yes,
Is that a photograph of the scene with the vines cleared away to appreciate everything on the ground and its relation to each other?
the vines are cleared away, and you can see that the log that was down there has been removed.
And does it fairly inaccurately depict the scene with those alterations you've discussed?
Yes, sir, it does.
This time, Your Honor, moving to evidence State's Exhibit CI.
No objection, Your Honor.
We received an evidence the state's numbered.
208.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Now, I believe you indicated before we published this, you put a blue line at the bottom. Is that approximately where the log was?
Yes, sir.
But the log had been removed.
Yes, so it's moved over to the side.
And again, you indicated that some vines had been removed.
Yes, sir.
Was anything cleared at this point from ground level, or was it all the stuff above?
No,
that
it was just things that were above it that were hindering our ability to visualize what was down there.
So with respect to the things that are on the ground, is everything in the same position it was when you got there?
Yes, sir.
If we could move on to State's Exhibit CJ. Do you recognize this photograph?
Yes, I do.
And what is, let me clear that annotation. What is this a photograph of?
This is a close-up of the skull.
Now, is this taken after the vines have been cleared away, the log has been removed,
Yes, sir.
but has any of the ground material been disturbed in any way?
Not at all. It was just a close-up of the area after it had been cleared up a little bit, but nothing had been moved.
At this time, Your Honor, moving to, then does it fairly inaccurately depict the scene at that
Yes,
point?
it does.
This time, Your Honor, moving to evidence, State's Exhibit C.
No objection, Your Honor.
It will be received in evidence the state's numbered.
209.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Now, tell me, if you will, sort of describe the angle at which you took this photograph or what you were attempting to do.
This photograph was taken from the opposite side of where the other ones were. We moved from, for discussion's sake, the one side where the log was, we moved outside of the area and came into it from another point so that we could visualize the other side without having to step over anything or disturb anything. So now this photograph was taken from the other side, the other perspective, where you couldn't see the front of the skull from that other vantage point. We moved so that you could visualize the skull without having to move anything.
Now, at what height is the camera when this is taken? I mean, did you,
It probably wasn't 2.5 feet off the ground.
and how did you accomplish that?
By the camera we have is a digital camera, and it has a screen in the back that you can flip out and rotate so that you don't have to stay behind the camera as you're watching it the whole time. So we were able to, or I was able to go ahead and bring that camera down and rotate the screen up so that I could still see what the camera was seeing without having to get down onto the ground at the same level. So that's how that was accomplished.
So you're actually standing up, but you're holding the camera
Well, I
low.
was bending down, but I was not, my face was not behind the camera because of the arrangement of the screen on the back of the camera.
Now, in this photograph, can you see the duct tape?
Yes, sir.
Now, from your observation of it, at this point, could you determine whether it was appeared to be more than one piece of duct tape?
No, not at that point.
Could you circle the duct tape for us? Now, obviously, this is a two-dimensional photograph, but the tape itself, as it was sitting there, was it flat on the ground? Was it perpendicular? Was it at an angle? Could you give us that additional dimension to this photograph?
It was difficult to tell because of the hair mat and the undergrowth, the plant material that was there. To the best of my knowledge, the people that were processing the scene, including myself, had not moved anything. So that is exactly how we saw it, and we hadn't moved anything. So it was difficult to tell exactly where it was.
All right. So there was a great deal of leaf debris sort of around it.
Still.
Right. Now, we see in the photograph a portion of the duct tape. Is there a portion of the duct tape that is under the leaf debris?
We didn't know that at the time.
Okay.
But subsequently, upon moving, when you do these, you photograph everything as you find it.
Sure.
You want to record it exactly as it was found. And after you've done that, then you're in a position where you can go ahead and start to make some changes. But you want to always be able to photograph something exactly how it was found. And then, as we're doing now, then we explain that. And then, so any subsequent photographs, we can say that we had to clear some of that undergrowth and what have you away so we could see.
Now, you mentioned a hair mat. Can you show the jury in this photograph the hair mat you're talking about?
Let
me clear the tape annotation, first of all.
Okay.
So you can make a new one if you like.
Okay. It appeared, and it's what it appeared at the scene and was subsequently learned to be true, that this area here and around here and some back here was probably hair.
And did it appear that way to you at the time?
It did.
Did it appear also that the matter on top of the skull here, sort of these strands, appeared to be hair also?
Correct.
Let me go on to State's Exhibit CK, I believe is the next one. And do you see State's Exhibit CK?
Yes, I do.
And does that fairly and accurately depict the relationship of the skull, the tape, and the bags that appear in the photograph?
Yes, it does.
This time, Your Honor, move now to State's Exhibit CK.
What says the defense? Be received in evidence the states numbered.
May I publish?
You may publish.
Now, these particular items we see in the photograph, let me just ask you, when you, as the crime scene investigator for the medical examiner's office, do you have a responsibility that's slightly different than responsibility of the crime scene investigators for the police agency?
Yes, sir. We investigate death scenes, and we are responsible for providing the information to the medical examiner regarding the way the scene looks and how it is related to the remains. The majority of times it's a full set of remains, occasionally decomposed, or in this case, skeletonized. So we need to go ahead and try and put into perspective those things that we believe are pertinent to understanding the scene and the circumstances. So we focus more on the scene itself as it relates with the remains, than a lot of the broad photographs that the regular crime scene folks would take.
In terms of custody of the remains and items related to the remains, what is the protocol for that?
Okay. The Florida statute gives the medical examiner's office the authority over the remains. We work hand in hand with law enforcement. They own and control the crime scene, but we have the remains. In this particular case, one of the things that we were thinking was that there were probably remains in the bag. And we were, I'll be honest, hoping that most of the remains were in that bag because it would have made it a much simpler case rather than having to go search all over a field or, in this case, a wooded area. So we considered this potentially these bags having contained additional remains. So we looked at that as part of our jurisdiction.
So you would have, in effect, been in custody, if you will, or control over not just the skull, but the bags as well.
After discussion with law enforcement, they agreed that that's probably the way it should be handled in this particular case.
Now, let's move on to State's Exhibit CL, please. Do you recognize State's Exhibit CL?
Yes, sir.
Is this an additional photograph of the skull showing the duct tape and its relationship to the bag?
Yes, sir, it is. The one plastic bag.
The one plastic bag. And does it fairly and accurately depict the scene as you saw it?
Yes, it does.
At this time, you ought to move down to State's Exhibit CL.
It will be received in evidence. The state's numbered.
211.
And publish.
You may publish.
Now, this photograph, I want to discuss with you a little bit about the skull, its position. Was the skull, portions of the skull, beneath the level of the leaf litter or ground around it?
I'm not sure about dirt, but I can tell you that it seemed to be embedded in the vines. You can see there are vines and leaves and other ground debris, and it seemed to be embedded in that debris.
Now, it appears from the photograph that at least the front, the debris was up to about the mid-eye socket level. Is that?
It does, yes.
Is that how it was actually? Does that? This
is an accurate representation of what we saw.
And then if you can kind of demonstrate for if you can, sort of where the debris line would have been around the skull, and you can feel free to use your own skull.
Well,
as an example.
I can kind of do my own skull, or I can draw the line. It's kind of right
Well,
where.
show me on your skull so
Okay,
we can
well,
see what.
It's kind of like right about there without the glasses, okay? Just below, or just a little bit below, or touching a little bit above the eye socket.
Okay, so from the eye sockets, and did it go around the head,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, kind of give me that, the circumference.
Yeah, the entire.
Wait. Both of you cannot talk at the same time.
Apologize, Madam Court Reporter. If you could just give me a demonstration of the total circumference, that'd be helpful.
It was circumferential around the skull.
Was the skull sitting essentially in its, let me rephrase, when we say anatomical position, we mean as if someone were standing straight up. All right, so from that purpose, was the skull completely straight up, or was it a slight angle one way or the other?
I believe it was angled. It was not straight up.
Angled so the back was low, or do you recall?
It was very difficult to tell because of the orientation of the ground around it.
Fair enough. Now, did you come up with a method of trying to remove the skull and the tape together as a group?
Yeah. We the crime scene people, Welsh, Investigator Welsh, and the supervisor Susan Mears were out there, and we talked about it. And my suggestion was that we go ahead and I would remove as large an area from the side and under the skull and lift it up and place it into a paper bag. At this point in time, we were most interested in recovering everything that was there. without making any substantial changes in its orientation, because we realized that the duct tape and the hair mat were important exactly the way they were. And we weren't exactly sure what else was in that area of vegetation and debris around it. So I reached, or we decided the best way to do it would be to try and collect a large portion of that area, just not lift the skull up. So we planned to go ahead and lift an area to include the skull and the debris, and then put it into a paper bag for transport.
Let me show you State's Exhibit GK. And I believe this is in evidence as State's Exhibit 199 for the record. Let me clear the annotation. May I publish? This is in evidence as State's 199.
You may.
Thank you. Is this, though obviously you didn't take this photograph, is this a photograph taken of you attempting in the middle of removing the skull?
That's correct.
All right.
It looks like I had already reached down and gotten the outer areas, and my hands were coming together under the skull to lift it up. One of the crime scene investigators was holding a bag open so that I could just reach over and then place this entire pile of debris and skull into the bag for security and transport.
Do you have a recollection of approximately how far out from the skull you went in terms of your initial penetration of the ground?
For about 6 to 8 inches from around the skull. The skull is here in the center. I would put my hand 6 to 8 inches out to the side and then gone down until I hit something pretty solid, and then tried to scoop it up and then lift everything that was there to deposit in a large brown paper bag.
Okay, looking at State's Exhibit 199, there appears to be a slightly darker area around here. Is that sort of where you had removed debris? Is that
It
what that is?
would appear to be that way, yes.
And did you attempt, as best you could, to keep the tape in the same position in reference to the skull as it was on the ground?
The hair mat and the tape both, yes.
Just so we're clear, was it possible to keep it in precisely, exactly the same position?
I seriously doubt it, but we certainly made the best effort that we possibly could.
And when you said that was collected and was placed in a paper bag?
Correct.
And did you collect other items from the scene there that morning?
Yes, we did.
What other items were collected from the scene that
We
morning?
collected the plastic bag and the canvas bag that was next to it, because we felt that may have had additional remains in it. And there were also some other long bones that were in the area of the skull, in the proximity, which would again be part of our responsibility as the medical examiner's office. So while they weren't part of the large area that we collected with the skull or from the bags, they were also collected and placed in a bag for transport back to the medical examiner's office.
So you said the bag you're talking about the trash bag or the canvas bag or both?
The trash bag and the canvas bag were collected again as one unit, so that we could get everything that was in that area. Again, same thing, going down from the outside of it around and scooping it up and then putting it onto a plastic shroud and then putting that into a body bag.
And was that taken then as a large?
As a unit.
As a unit. Did you also collect some items of possible clothing, I think a pair of shorts?
There was,
There.
I didn't know at the time that they were shorts, but there were some items of cloth that may have been clothing, but those were also collected because we considered as a part of that scene.
Was there anything else you took from the scene that first morning? You said the skull, the bag, the shorts, the long bone, anything else?
That's pretty much it. There was something besides the shorts. There was a large piece of cloth. Later learned it was some sort of a blanket, I think. But those things that were of that ilk that were with each other, they were all picked up and transported back.
To the medical examiner's office?
Indeed, yes.
And when you arrived at the medical examiner's office, did you turn all that material over to one of the forensic pathologists at the medical
Yes, I
examiner's
did.
office?
Yes, I did.
Who was that?
That was Dr. Gary Utz, the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner.
Over the next number of days, did you continue to transport evidence or remains from that scene on Suburban to the medical examiner's office?
One of my roles was to go ahead and go back and forth between the scene, confer with Dr. Schultz, with the crime scene people, so that we kind of knew what was going on. And as they were collecting things that they believed to be bones or part of that scene that were possibly human remains, okay, those would be collected and cataloged by the crime scene people, and that included the people from the sheriff's office and the other agencies that were assisting, but under the supervision of the sheriff's office. They would collect those things, and then I would sign for them out there on most occasions, transport them back to the medical examiner's office for security and examination by the medical examiners that were working on the case. There were one or two instances where one of the crime scene people may have transported it from the scene and into our office, but for the most part, I was the one that was going back and forth, bringing the things that had been collected during the extensive search that they did of the area back to the medical examiner's office.
And you indicated your first trip, obviously we've just talked about, was December 11th. What was the date of your last trip? And if you need to refer to your report to refresh your recollection, that's fine.
I think the 17th of December was the last time I went out there.
And was the purpose of that to collect?
Again, to do the same
Some
thing,
more bones.
to gather whatever remains or things that they thought might be remains. There were a number of things that were collected that Dr. Schultz was going to have to look at to see if in fact they were bones, or if they were human bones, or if they may have been some other sort of wood debris.
You mentioned a Dr. Schultz. Who is Dr. Schultz?
Dr. John Schultz is an anthropologist. He is our primary anthropology consultant at the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office, and he was working with us. As a matter of fact, I called him probably before I went to the scene on the 11th, just to give him a heads up, to let him know what was going on, to see if he would be able to join us out there.
And did he show up at the scene?
Not on the 11th, but he did show up at the medical examiner's office that afternoon, and I'm not sure whether he was there when I got back or shortly thereafter, but he was there that afternoon of the 11th at the medical examiner's office.
And the area that we've been discussing where the remains were found, is that here in Orange County, Florida?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Afternoon.
Mr. Mason?
It's the only time I ever want to see you.
Yes, sir.
I saw in the photographs that you identified, and I'll tell court and counsel in just a second which one it was. I believe it's exhibit number 201. Did I see 201? You see that, sir?
Yes, sir, I do.
May we publish this, Your Honor?
Yes.
Did that work? No. Okay. Would you tell us what that is lying there in the grass or the right of way?
Which thing?
Well,
Point out which one, because there are two things that are standing out there.
okay, you point to one and tell me what it is, 'cause I don't know how to work this machine. I know
Okay.
what I see, you tell me what you see.
Okay, this thing right over here looks like a machete that was stuck into the ground.
And beside it,
And beside it is, I don't know, I just noticed it when we were reviewing photographs later. It looks like an arrow, but I didn't pay attention or notice that. Certainly wasn't anything that I put there.
well, did you use the machete?
No,
Do you know who used the machete?
no, I don't. I didn't even notice the machete until I started looking at the pictures a lot closer.
Well, from the pictures you did look at when you were reviewing, it was clear that there had been no pun intended, but some clearing of all of the woods there before you got there, wasn't there?
Objection, basis of knowledge,
I'm sorry?
Overruled.
Go ahead, sir.
It looks like somebody had cut a path through some of the underbrush. If you look at the center of that screen, kind of like here, it looks like somebody had cleared that a little bit, but that's how I found it, so I don't know who did it.
Did you, in your review of the photographs, look at a long series of photographs taken by Ms. Welch from CSI?
No, I just reviewed mine.
Just your own photographs?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so by the time you got there, how many law enforcement and/or CSI people had been on the scene? Do you know?
No, I don't, but there were several,
Bunch.
a lot.
And was the media there also by the time you got there?
Not at the area of the scene. They were behind the yellow tape a block or so away,
All of them down the road?
pretty much.
So you don't know how many people had preceded you in that area to clear debris and move things around?
No, I don't.
You've told us in a couple of, at least 3 times, I guess, you mentioned a log, a rotted log.
Excuse me?
A log, a rotted
Oh,
log?
yes, sir, a rotted log, yes, sir.
And was that there laying in the area of or over the remains when you got there?
It was not over the remains, it was beside the remains, and yes, it was.
And do you know who moved that log?
Yes, sir, it was me.
Okay. And after you moved it, what did you find?
After I photographed it,
And then what did you find, sir?
I found a better visualization of the remains in the bags.
Okay. Now, I want to direct your attention specifically also now to exhibit number 209 in evidence. Oh, we have to do this stuff here. I don't know how you take this off of here. How you take this off of here?
209 CJ.
Do what?
CJ.
No. I want to take this one off and put the other one on there.
Here, that's unpublished.
Okay.
That arrow up top.
You know, we used to just have pictures, you hold them up and take them up. Thank you, then you stay right here.
No, I don't work for you.
Well, they don't mind.
All right, folks.
Thank you very much. Now give me number 209, please. Oh, there it is. And
Sir, it doesn't make any
May I
difference what
publish that, Your
number it
Honor?
is, I can't see anything.
you can't see?
No,
You
sir.
should see it now.
Yes, sir.
May I publish this to the jury?
You may.
If I know how? Now, y'all tell me if I push the right button.
Yeah, you pushed the right.
Got it? Mr. Hanson, I'm seeing duct tape laying flat on the surface of the ground there.
Objection to counsel's opinion
Well, I'm
of the
going to
photograph. Your Honor, could we approach?
No,
May I ask the question, please?
finish the question.
Thank you, sir. I'm seeing that duct tape looks like it's laying flat on the ground. Is that correct?
Objection to counsel's expression of his opinion. The photograph speaks for itself.
Overruled.
What was the question?
It looks like it's lying flat on the ground. Is that correct, sir?
There is a portion of the duct tape that looks like it is laying on the ground, yes.
All right, sir. And is there also an edge of that you can see? It appears to be torn.
Yes.
And that'd be like the end of the tape.
I'm not sure whether that was the end of the tape or the fact that the duct tape itself had started to break down and the silver had come away from the fibrous reinforcement.
And that piece of duct tape as it's lying there, sir, was it measured there at the scene?
Was it?
Measured?
No.
Were
At least
there?
it was not measured
sorry.
by it was not measured by me.
Good enough. And when you took these photographs, were there any scales used to go with the photographs? Like a ruler put down beside it or anything?
No, sir.
I believe you told Mr. Ashton that this skull appeared to be somewhat embedded. Is that your word?
Yes.
And how deep was whatever it was embedded in, do you know?
No, I don't. There was The ground clutter, which consisted of vegetation, I don't believe that it was embedded in dirt per se. I think it was just embedded in the vegetation.
When you were asked to come there and look at this scene, do your job, did you know if anybody had moved that skull in any way before you got there?
The initial information that I received was that the person that found it may have kicked it, but that was,
Hearsay. Move to strike.
So
I have motion to strike, Judge. Thank you. And ask the jury to disregard the comment.
you done? On your watch of what you did, then you don't have any firsthand knowledge about whether somebody had moved it before.
that is correct.
And then what you do is you gather it up, and as Mr. Ashton was showing us, republishing number 199. Can we have 199 now? Do you see that, sir?
Yes, sir.
May I show it to the jury again, Your Honor?
You may.
Do you know who all those other feet belong to?
Well, two of them are mine. I'm not 100% sure who the other folks were. I was concentrating.
Officials.
Excuse me?
It'd be officials, right?
Oh, yes, there was no one that wasn't authorized there.
And so what was, or what were the reasons you had for digging down and trying to gather as much of the material around the skull as you could?
The primary reason was to make sure that, one, I collected everything that was around it, and two, that I didn't move anything that was important, such as the duct tape and the hair mat.
So if the duct tape were positioned flat, as we saw a moment ago with the pictures, when,
A fact not in evidence in counsel's opinion.
Sustain, rephrase the question.
if the duct tape were in the position that was revealed in the photos we saw just a few moments ago, would you agree, sir, that when you lifted it all up, the duct tape would have changed position?
It could have.
And by the way, you mentioned some names. Dr. Utz was the on-call medical examiner that caught this case originally.
I don't know if he was on call, but he was the medical examiner that stayed to receive the remains when I got back to the medical examiner's office.
And that was on the 11th of December, 2008.
Correct.
Ultimately, or a day or so later, if I read your report correctly, Dr. Garavaglia came in. Is that correct?
Came in as,
To the process,
yes.
and she took over.
It seemed that way. That was where I was no longer involved. That was doctor stuff.
Well, now you went out there several days in a row.
Right.
You went out there repeatedly to pick up evidence that had been found by the various CSI folks, right?
I was involved with the transportation, but not the analysis.
Right. But I mean, you went out there and you got whatever they had from that day's sifting work. And searching
Sifting or searching of the area, yes,
work. Took it back to the medical examiner's office.
correct.
And somebody put it together.
Obviously. Yes.
It wasn't you,
No, sir.
but did you observe it?
Did I observe it? There were occasions when I was in the same room when they were doing some of the work, but I wasn't.
Assembling, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But I wasn't there to observe what they were doing. I was doing my job.
And what was being done with these items that you brought back from this scene was somebody was assembling the skeleton.
There were a number of things that were being done as part of a process, and obviously reconstructing it was part of it, yes.
And was that process photographed?
Not by me.
Maybe two.
I'm here for you.
The log that you raised your hand, you said you moved it.
Yes, sir.
Did you photograph the whole thing before you moved it?
No.
Anybody photograph you moving it?
I
That
don't
you know of?
I couldn't while I was moving it, so I don't know if they were.
Okay, so what did you do with it?
Pushed it off to the left side in an area that we didn't believe would interfere with anything.
Completely away from the evidence field, or so you thought?
Yes.
All right. Mister, I have one more minute.
You may.
Have you looked at all these photographs you took?
The ones that I took?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Have you seen, you already told me you didn't see all the ones that other people took.
That's correct.
Do you have any knowledge about a whiteboard, like a possible 2x4 or 1x6 laying across that log?
No, I don't.
Never saw anything like that in your,
No,
when
I
you
didn't.
got there, while you were there?
If it had been there when I got there, I would have photographed it because it shouldn't have been moved to once I got there.
All right, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Any redirect?